I want you to close your eyes for a second and imagine something. Imagine spending 5 years away from your child. 5 years of missed birthdays, missed first days of school, missed bedtime stories. 5 years of staring at a phone screen, watching your baby grow up through tiny pixelated video calls while you sit alone in a foreign country thousands of miles away. Now imagine finally getting on that plane, finally landing on American soil, finally driving to the house where your daughter lives, your heart pounding so hard you can barely breathe, your hands shaking on the steering wheel because you are minutes away from holding her again. You have rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in your head. She runs to the door, she jumps into your arms, she smells like strawberry shampoo, and she says, "Mama, I missed you." That is the moment you have been surviving for. That is the only thing that kept you going through every lonely night in Frankfurt, through every holiday you spent alone, through every moment you questioned whether leaving was the right decision. Now imagine walking into that house and your daughter is not at the door. She is not in the living room. She is not in her bedroom. The house is dark. It smells wrong. Something sour and rotten hangs in the air like a warning. And then you find a door with a padlock on it. A padlock on a door inside a house where your 7-year-old daughter is supposed to be living. You open that door and you walk down a set of concrete stairs into a basement. And there she is, your baby girl, lying on a stained mattress on a cold floor, her ankle chained to a water pipe with a bicycle lock. She is so thin that her collarbone looks like it might cut through her skin. Her eyes are open, but they do not see you, not right away. She has forgotten what it looks like when someone comes to help. That is not a nightmare. That is not a scene from a movie. That is what happened to me. My name is Colleen Merritt. I am 34 years old. I am a veterinary technician, and the people who did this to my daughter were not strangers. They were not criminals off the street. They were my former in-laws, Gail and Holt Merritt, the same woman who hugged me at the airport 5 years earlier and told me not to worry. The same woman who said, "Sweetheart, we will take care of Brinley like she is our own." The same woman who took $1,800 from me every single month for 5 straight years, while my daughter starved in her basement. My ex-husband, Derek, knew, or at least he should have known. He signed guardianship over to his parents because he said his work schedule was too demanding. He was a freight dispatcher. He worked long hours, sure, but he also never once drove to his parents' house to check on his own child. Not once in 5 years. He called maybe 3 times a year. Christmas. Her birthday, if he remembered. And that was it. He handed his daughter off like she was a piece of furniture he did not have room for anymore, and he never looked back. My daughter Brinley was 2 years old when I left for Germany. 2 years old. She could barely say full sentences. She used to grab my finger when we walked, and she would not let go. She had this little laugh that sounded like hiccups, and it was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard in my life. When I left her with Gail and Holt, she was healthy. She was happy. She was loved. When I found her in that basement 5 years later, she weighed 34 pounds. A 7-year-old child weighed 34 pounds. That is what a 4-year-old is supposed to weigh. She had infections on her wrists and ankles from the chain rubbing against her skin. She had a fractured forearm that had healed on its own because nobody ever took her to a doctor. She did not speak. She did not cry. She just stared at me like she was trying to figure out if I was real or if she was dreaming again. I am going to tell you everything that happened, how I ended up in Germany, how I trusted the wrong people, how the woman who called herself a grandmother turned into a monster, how my ex-husband chose convenience over his own flesh and blood, and how I fought with everything I had to get justice for my little girl. But I need you to understand something before I start. This story is not easy to hear. There were moments when I wanted to give up, moments when the guilt of leaving almost crushed me, moments when I sat in a hospital hallway and wondered if my daughter would ever speak again. But I did not give up, and by the end of this story, you will understand why. My sister Wanda once told me something that I carry with me every single day. She said, "Colleen, you did not break that child. They did. Your job now is to put her back together, and that is exactly what I did. So stay with me." Because this story has a lot of pain in it, but it also has something else. It has the moment when my daughter looked at me for the first time in 6 months and said, "Mama, can we get a dog?" And if that does not break your heart and heal it at the same time, I do not know what will. This is my story, and I promise you, every single word of it is true. Let me take you back 5 years. I was 29 years old, living in a small rental house in Dayton, Ohio, working at an animal clinic 6 days a week. I loved my job. I had always loved animals, ever since I was a little girl growing up on the outskirts of Columbus with my sister Wanda and our parents. My mother used to say, "Colleen, you care more about stray cats than you care about people." And honestly, she was not entirely wrong. Animals never lied to you. Animals never pretended to love you while they were planning to destroy your life. I was married to Derek Merritt. We got married when I was 25 and he was 28. He was a freight dispatcher for a regional trucking company. Decent job, steady paycheck, long hours. When we first got together, he was charming in that quiet, Midwestern way. He opened doors. He remembered my coffee order. He told me I was the smartest woman he had ever met. But somewhere between the wedding and the baby, that version of Derek disappeared. By the time Brinley was born, he was already pulling away. He would come home from work, eat dinner in front of the television, and go to bed without saying more than 10 words to me. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it would get better. It did not get better. Brinley was the light in that house. She was born on a Tuesday morning in March, and the moment the nurse put her on my chest, I felt something shift inside me that I cannot explain. It was like every scattered piece of my life suddenly clicked into place. I looked at her tiny face and I thought, I will do anything for you, anything in this world. I meant it then, and I mean it now more than ever. When Brinley was about 18 months old, I got an email that changed everything. A veterinary surgical training program in Frankfurt, Germany was accepting international applicants. It was one of the most prestigious programs in the world. They trained veterinary technicians in advanced surgical assisting techniques that very few clinics in America even offered. The program was 2 years long, fully funded, and it came with a monthly stipend. If I completed it, I would come back to the United States with credentials that would double my salary overnight. I would be able to give Brinley the kind of life I never had growing up. I sat with that email for 3 days before I told anyone. I read it over and over. I ran the numbers. I calculated what 2 years of separation would cost me emotionally and what it would gain us financially. And then I called my sister Wanda. She did not even let me finish explaining before she said, "Colleen, if you do not apply for this, I will never forgive you. You have been working towards something like this your entire career. Do not let Derek and his silent treatment hold you back." Derek did not care one way or the other. When I brought it up, he barely looked away from the television. He said, "Do what you want, Colleen. You always do anyway." That sentence told me everything I needed to know about where our marriage was heading, but I was not ready to face it yet. The real conversation that sealed my decision happened with Gail, my mother-in-law. I drove over to her house on a Sunday afternoon, and I sat at her kitchen table, and I laid everything out. The program, the timeline, the money I would be sending home every month. I told her I needed help with Brinley. I told her I could not do this unless I knew my daughter was safe and loved and taken care of every single day. Gail reached across that table and took my hands. She looked me right in the eyes, and she said, "Colleen, that little girl is my grandbaby. I raised 2 boys in this house, and I have more love to give than I know what to do with. You go to Germany, you make something of yourself, and you do. Not worry about Brinley for 1 single second because she will be right here with me and Holt, and she will not miss a thing. I will send you pictures every week. I will make sure she knows her mama loves her. I promise you on my life." I believed her. I believed every word that came out of that woman's mouth. She had tears in her eyes when she said it. She squeezed my hands. She hugged me at the door when I left, and she whispered, "You are a good mother, Colleen. Do not ever doubt that." And I drove home that night feeling like maybe everything was going to be okay. Maybe I could have both, the career and the family, the future and the present. I packed 2 suitcases. I kissed my daughter's forehead while she slept. I stood in her doorway for 20 minutes just watching her breathe. And then I walked out of that house and I got on a plane to Frankfurt, Germany. That was the last time I saw my daughter healthy and whole. I just did not know it yet. The first year in Germany went in exactly the way Gail promised it would. Every Sunday I would video call and there was Brinley sitting on Gail's lap, waving at the screen with her little hands, sometimes showing me a drawing she made or a stuffed animal Gail had bought her. Gail would give me updates. She would say Brinley ate all her vegetables today, or she is starting to recognize her letters already. I would hang up and cry happy tears because my daughter looked healthy and my sacrifice felt worth it. I sent $1,800 home every single month without fail. That money was supposed to cover Brinley's food, clothing, daycare, medical checkups, and anything else she needed. I kept receipts of every single transfer. I never missed a payment, not once. I figured if I could not be there in person, the least I could do was make sure my daughter never wanted for anything material. The second year is when things started to crack. Derek called me one evening out of nowhere and told me he wanted a divorce. He said he had been thinking about it for a long time, and he did not see the point in staying married to someone who lived on another continent. I was hurt, but I was not surprised. Our marriage had been dying long before I left for Germany. What scared me was not losing Derek. What scared me was losing access to my daughter. I told him the only thing I cared about was Brinley. He said she is fine with my parents, just sign the papers, Colleen. So I did. We agreed that Gail and Holt would maintain guardianship until I returned. Derek signed the paperwork. I signed the paperwork. And just like that, my marriage was over. After the divorce, something changed in the video calls. It was subtle at first. Gail started cutting them short, 5 minutes instead of 20. She would say, Brinley is tired today or we have church in the morning. Then she started canceling altogether. I would call on Sunday and nobody would answer. I would text Gail and she would respond hours later with a short message, saying, sorry, we were busy, she is fine. I asked to speak directly to Brinley and Gail said she does not like talking on the phone anymore. You know how kids are. I did not know how kids are. That was the whole problem. I was 6,000 miles away relying on a woman I was no longer even related to by marriage to tell me the truth about my own daughter, and the truth was getting harder and harder to find. By year 3, the photos stopped. Gail used to send me pictures every week without me even asking. Now I had to beg for one, and when it finally came, it was always the same kind of picture. Brinley from a distance. Brinley with her face partially turned away. Brinley wearing a bulky sweater, even though it was July in Ohio. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself Gail was just getting older and was not as good with technology. I told myself 100 different lies because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. I called Wanda and told her something felt wrong. She said, do you want me to drive over there and check? I almost said yes. But then Gail called me that same evening, cheerful as ever, and put Brinley on the phone for 2 minutes. Brinley said, hi, Mama, in a small, quiet voice, and I convinced myself that everything was fine. I told Wanda, never mind, I think I was just overthinking it. That is a decision I will regret for the rest of my life. Year 4, I extended my contract. The clinic in Frankfurt offered me a full-time position with a salary that would let me save enough to buy a house back in Ohio. I figured 1 more year, and I would come home with enough money to give Brinley a real, stable life. Gail said, that sounds wonderful. Colleen, take your time. We are doing just fine. Those words echo in my head now, and they make me sick. During that 4th year, Gail stopped answering my calls almost entirely. I would call 5 or 6 times in a row and get nothing. Then days later, she would text me a single line. Brinley is good. Been busy with church activities. I started sending emails asking for updated photos, school report cards, anything. Gail responded to maybe 1 out of every 10. And when she did respond, it was always vague, always deflecting. Always just enough to keep me quiet without actually telling me anything. By the time I booked my flight home at the end of year 5, I had not had a real conversation with my daughter in over 8 months. 8 months of silence that I filled with hope, because hope was all I had left. I told myself, when I walk through that door, everything will make sense again. I could not have been more wrong. My flight landed at Dayton International Airport on a Thursday afternoon in September. I had 2 suitcases and a bag full of gifts for Brinley, a stuffed bear from a Christmas market in Munich, a hand-painted music box from a little shop in Heidelberg, a locket with a photo of the 2 of us taken the day before I left for Germany. I had been carrying that bag through 3. connecting flights, and I held it on my lap the entire time because checking it felt too risky. If those suitcases got lost, I could survive. If that bag got lost, I would fall apart. I rented a car at the airport and started driving straight to Gail and Holt's house. It was about a 40-minute drive, and I spent every second of it talking to myself out loud. I kept saying, "You are about to see your baby girl, Colleen. She is going to be so big now. She is going to look so different." I pictured her opening the door. I pictured her face lighting up. I even practiced what I was going to say. I had this whole speech planned about how Mama is never leaving again and how we are going to start a brand new life together. I must have rehearsed it 20 times on that drive. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I noticed was that the lawn had not been mowed in weeks. The grass was up to my shins. There were newspapers scattered on the porch, still in their plastic wrappers. The curtains on every window were drawn shut. Something cold settled into my chest, but I pushed it down. I told myself maybe Holt had been sick. Maybe they went on a short trip and just got back. There had to be a simple explanation. I knocked on the front door. No answer. I knocked again, harder. Nothing. I rang the doorbell 3 times. Silence. I pressed my ear against the door and the house was completely still. No television, no footsteps, no little girl's voice. I pulled out my phone and called Gail. Straight to voicemail. I called Holt. Same thing. I called Derek and he picked up on the 4th ring, sounding annoyed like I had interrupted something important. I said, "Derek, I am standing outside your parents' house and nobody is home." "Where is Brinley?" He was quiet for a second and then he said, "Oh yeah, Mom and Dad went on some cruise. They left last week, I think." My whole body went cold. I said, "Derek, who is watching our daughter." He said, "I do not know. I figured Mom set something up." I said, "You figured? You did not ask? You did not confirm that someone was actually watching your 7-year-old child?" He said, "Colleen, do not start with me right now. I am sure she is fine." I hung up on him and I walked around to the back of the house. The back screen door was unlatched. I pulled it open and stepped into the kitchen. The smell hit me before my eyes adjusted to the dark. It was sour and thick and wrong in a way that made my throat tighten. Dishes were piled in the sink with mold growing on them. Mail was stacked on the counter going back at least 3 weeks. A calendar on the wall had a big circle around a date, 2 weeks earlier, with the words Caribbean Cruise, written in Gail's handwriting with a smiley face next to it. A smiley face. That image is burned into my brain forever. I called out Brinley's name. My voice echoed through the empty house. I checked every room on the first floor. Nothing. I went upstairs. Her bedroom door was open. The bed was made, but it looked like it had not been slept in for a long time. There was dust on the nightstand. No toys on the floor. No shoes by the door. It looked like a guest room, not a child's room. I came back downstairs, and that is when I saw the basement door. It was in the hallway near the laundry room. There was a padlock on it. A padlock on an interior door in a house where my daughter was supposed to be living. The padlock was hanging open, not clicked shut, like someone had left in a hurry and did not bother to secure it. I pulled the door open, and a wave of damp, rotten air hit my face. I could hear something, a faint sound, like a whimper or a breath that was too shallow to be normal. I found the light switch and flicked it. A single bare bulb came on at the bottom of the stairs, and I looked down, and I saw her, my daughter, my Brinley, lying on a filthy mattress on a concrete floor with her ankle chained to a water pipe. She was so small, so impossibly small, and she did not even look up when the light came on. I do not remember going down those stairs. I just remember being on my knees beside her, touching her face, saying her name over and over. And she looked at me with these hollow, empty eyes, and she did not recognize me. Her own mother was kneeling right in front of her, and she had no idea who I was. I called 911 with my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. The dispatcher asked me what my emergency was, and I said my daughter is chained in a basement and she is not responsive. Those words coming out of my own mouth sounded like they belonged to someone else's life. The dispatcher told me to stay calm and not move her and not remove the chain because it was evidence. She said help was on the way. I hung up and I sat on that cold concrete floor next to my daughter, and I held her hand and I whispered, "Mama is here now. Mama is right here." She did not squeeze back. Her fingers were limp and cold. I called Wanda next. My sister picked up on the second ring. And before she could even say hello, I said they chained her, Wanda. They left her here alone. For a moment, there was complete silence on the other end. Then Wanda said, "I am getting in my car right now. Do not touch anything else. I am calling a lawyer before I even leave my driveway. That is who my sister is. She does not panic. She acts." Officer Tatum Briggs arrived in 12 minutes. She walked into that kitchen, looked around, and I could see the shift in her face when the smell hit her. I led her to the basement door, and she looked down those stairs, and she stopped. She stood there for maybe 3 seconds, and then she pulled her radio off her belt and called for backup and an ambulance. She looked at me and said, "How long has she been down here?" I said, "I do not know. I just got back from Germany today." She nodded and went down the stairs with gloves on and started documenting everything. The chain, the bucket in the corner, the empty cereal box, the dry water bottle. She photographed all of it. The paramedics arrived and they brought Brinley up on a stretcher. When they lifted her, I heard one of them say something under his breath to his partner. He said she weighs nothing. They put her in the ambulance and I climbed in beside her, and I did not let go of her hand the entire ride to the hospital. She stared at the ceiling the whole time. No crying, no talking. Just those empty eyes looking at nothing. At the hospital, Dr. Annabelle Foss took over. She examined Brinley for over 2 hours. When she came out to talk to me in the hallway, her face told me everything before her mouth did. She said Brinley weighed 34 pounds. She was severely dehydrated. She was malnourished to the point where her body had started breaking down its own muscle for energy. She had infected wounds on both wrists and her left ankle from the chain rubbing against her skin over an extended period. She had a healed fracture in her left forearm that had never been set or treated by a doctor. And she was nonverbal. Not because she could not speak, but because she had stopped speaking. Dr. Foss said that happens sometimes with prolonged isolation. The brain shuts down the parts it decides are no longer necessary for survival. I stood in that hallway, and I felt something inside me harden. The grief was still there, but something else grew up around it like concrete setting. I was not just a heartbroken mother anymore. I was a woman who was going to make sure every single person responsible for this paid for what they did. Wanda arrived with a family attorney named Gerald Kenner. Within 48 hours, we had filed for emergency sole custody, filed a criminal complaint with the county prosecutor, and requested that law enforcement intercept Gail and Holt when their cruise ship docked in Fort Lauderdale. I cooperated with Child Protective Services fully. I gave them every bank transfer receipt, every call log, every unanswered text message, every email Gail had ignored. 3 days later, Gail and Holt walked off that cruise ship carrying shopping bags and wearing matching sun hats. 2 detectives and a uniformed officer were waiting at the terminal. Gail saw them and her face went white. She was arrested on the spot. Holt was arrested right beside her. They were charged with felony child endangerment, aggravated child abuse, and unlawful restraint of a minor. And here is the part that broke me all over again. When detectives went through Gail's phone, they found text messages she had sent to relatives and church friends. In those messages, she told people that Brinley was living with a nice church family as part of a foster arrangement. She told neighbors that Brinley had been sent overseas to live with her mother. She had built an entire web of lies so detailed and so consistent that nobody ever thought to question it. Nobody ever knocked on that basement door. Nobody ever asked to see my daughter. And the money I sent every month, all $108,000 of it over 5 years, went to cruises and car payments and kitchen renovations. My daughter starved in a basement while her grandmother remodeled her countertops with my money. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I sat in that courtroom every single day in the same seat in the front row. I wore the locket around my neck, the one I had brought from Germany with the photo of me and Brinley taken 5 years earlier. I wore it so I could hold it when things got hard, and things got very hard. Gail's defense attorney tried to paint her as an overwhelmed elderly woman who made poor decisions under stress. He said she was not equipped to handle a young child, and she did what she thought was necessary to manage a difficult situation. When I heard those words, I gripped that locket so tight the edges left marks on my palm. A difficult situation. That is what he called chaining a 7-year-old to a pipe in a basement and leaving the country. Gail took the stand, And she looked right at me and she said that child was ungovernable. She said Brinley had behavioral problems and was a danger to herself, and the chain was for her own protection. She said it with a straight face. She said it like she believed it. And maybe she did. Maybe she had told herself that lie so many times it became her truth. But the evidence told a different story. The photographs told a different story. The medical records told a different story. And my daughter's 34-pound body told the loudest story of all. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Gail was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 14 years in state prison. Holt was found guilty and sentenced to 9 years. He cried when the judge read his sentence. He said, "I should have stopped her." "Yes, Holt, you should have." Derek was charged separately with criminal neglect. He pleaded guilty and received 5 years. During his sentencing, he did not look at me once. He stared at the table in front of him, like a man who had run out of excuses and knew it. All 3 of them lost any legal rights to Brinley permanently. The judge granted me full sole custody, and I walked out of that courthouse holding the paperwork against my chest like it was the most valuable thing I had ever owned, because it was. Wanda helped me find a small 2-bedroom apartment about 10 minutes from her house. She painted Brinley's room yellow because she read somewhere that yellow is a calming color for children who have experienced trauma. She hung curtains with little sunflowers on them, and she put a nightlight shaped like a moon on the bedside table. When I saw that room, I sat on the floor and cried for 20 minutes because my sister had done all of that without me even asking. The first month was the hardest month of my life. Harder than leaving for Germany. Harder than the divorce. Harder than finding her in that basement. Because now I had my daughter back, but she was not the same child I had left behind. Brinley did not sleep in her bed. She slept on the floor in the corner of the room with a blanket pulled over her head. She hoarded food under her pillow. Crackers, granola bars, pieces of bread. She hid them like someone was going to take them away. She flinched every time a door closed. She did not speak. Not a single word for 3 straight weeks. I did not push her. I did not force her to talk or eat at the table or sleep in her bed. I just sat with her. Every night I sat on the floor next to her and I read books out loud. Sometimes I read the same book 3 times in a row because I ran out of new ones. I left every light on in the apartment because darkness scared her. I kept every door open because closed doors made her freeze up. I learned to move slowly around her. I learned to announce myself before entering a room. I learned that healing does not happen on your schedule. It happens on theirs. 6 months after I brought her home, something happened that I will carry with me until the day I die. I was sitting on the kitchen floor sorting laundry, and Brinley walked in and stood in the doorway. She looked at me for a long time. And then in this small, clear voice, she said, "Mama, can we get a dog?" I dropped everything in my hands and I looked at her, and the tears came so fast I could not stop them. I said, "Baby, we can get 2. We adopted a rescue golden retriever from a shelter the following weekend. Brinley named her Sunflower. That dog slept at the foot of Brinley's bed every single night, and within a week, Brinley stopped sleeping on the floor. She climbed into her bed for the first time because Sunflower was there. An animal did what months of patience could not do on its own. That dog gave my daughter a reason to trust the world again." Today, Brinley is in therapy. She is making progress every single week. She started speaking in full sentences again. She started drawing pictures of our apartment and Sunflower, and sometimes she draws me standing next to her holding her hand. Last week, she drew a picture of the 2 of us with a yellow house in the background, and she wrote the word home underneath it. I framed it and hung it on the living room wall. If you are watching this and you have a child in someone else's care, I need you to hear me. Do not accept excuses. Do not let anyone tell you everything is fine without proof. Do not let distance become silence, because silence is where the worst things hide. I trusted the wrong people, and my daughter paid the price for that trust. But I also fought for her with everything I had, and I will keep fighting for her every single day for the rest of my life. My sister Wanda told me something during the worst of it. She said, "Colleen, you did not break that child, they did. Your job now is to put her back together, and that is exactly what I am doing. one day at a time, one bedtime story at a time, one walk with sunflower at a time. If this story touched your heart, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done if you walked into that basement. And if you have not already, subscribe to Buddy's Saga and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story. Every single day I bring you real stories about real people who found the strength to fight back when the world tried to break them. This is Buddy's Saga, and I will see you in the next one.